Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel, Reading Ideas. I've got a great reading idea for you today. I'm not sure it's for everybody though, but yeah, I'll come on to it in a second. Firstly, a big thank you. I'm just past 250 subscribers, which is amazing. Thank you very much for your time and patience and interest. If you've spent any time going through BookTube land, you'll see some interesting sites out there. Oh my gosh. You've got some great channels out there. Some niche channels with a few subscribers talking about their passion and interest. And perhaps not getting the number of subscribers that they deserve. And then you've got some other huge channels. Some of the huge channels seem to be kind of like pushing everything that moves new. Buy this, buy that. There's 12 new books coming out this next month. And they're all brilliant. Some other channels are kind of like lifestyle ones. Sit and watch me unwrap a box and have a cup of coffee. Hang on a second. Yeah. So, but you watch what you like, don't you? It's up to you what you watch and like. Right, the book that I've got today, you'll see why it might not be for everybody. It's 365 days, and it's probably I've read a few books on the Vietnam War, and it's probably the best book that I've read on the Vietnam War. It's written by a doctor who was based in Japan, where they were sending the injured out to, based on his knowledge, his experience, and the stories that he was told. And it really is fabulously written. Now, it is very gruesome. It is very gruesome. So you'll have to bear that in mind. Now, most of the books that I've read on the Vietnam War are usually by somebody who was sent there as a conscript for a year, and they talked in great detail about what happened to them. And that's as somebody who's been to war, then you have to take your hat off to them, and they've been there. But a lot of them are quite, a lot of what happened to them was 9/10 boredom and 1/10, frightening experience. And they wrote that story. This is a lot more tightly written. It's very, very densely written. And the guy who wrote it is very, very clever, very, very passionate. I'll read a little bit of one so that you get a bit of a flavour for it. So it's probably a good thing that it's in short stories, because you'll need a bit of a breather in between them. It really sucks you in, and obviously it's about war experience, and it can be quite graphic at times, quite emotional. So yeah, it's probably best that it is written in short stories, and you can dip in and out and get a breather. So I'll read the introduction from his good self. There was a time the army hospitals in Japan were averaging 6,000 to 8,000 patients a month, writes Dr. Glassner. There were days and sometimes weeks when the choppers never stopped coming in, and when they couldn't fly, the army brought the casualties over land from the Air Force bases in ambulance buses. The surgeons seemed ready for the emergency, and even the internists, but I had been sent to Japan as a paediatrician to serve the children of the dependent military population there. I soon realised that the troopers they were pulling off those medivac choppers were only children themselves. After a while, at least for me, it became impossible to see the war as anything but those kids. They were so engaging, so tragic, so confused and brave and pathetic. They had all the grace of martyrs. This is a quote from Washington Monthly. "Recounted in a dry, dispassionate, superbly controlled and ironic voice, as authentic and as moving a transcription of the soldier's true voice as any in recent memory. This moving account about tremendous courage and often immeasurable suffering is a valuable and redemptive work." Yeah, I'll read a bit from one so that you get an idea of whether you like the style of writing. I'll try and not read the most gruesome bits. But so there's certain subjects, that you get a coin has two sides, but sometimes, in the media only kind of shows one side of the coin. Not in this country, in America and here, the media has, you could call it a left-wing bias. In this country, there's certain topics, like if you mention Margaret Thatcher, there's a particular feeling immediately in the media, a negative feeling. But there were two sides. She was voted in 3 times and also did a lot of positive things for the country. A lot of very positive things. But you don't hear that in the media. Now, in America, there was two sides to the Vietnam War, looking, one coin, but viewed from two sides. If you view it from the media's point of view, it was just young people being sent across. It was badly managed. It was a terrible waste of life. What's the point? It's just a thoroughly wasted time, evil. All the people who were protesting against it, they were brilliant. They were on the right side of history. And the side of the Vietnam War that isn't shown is exactly what it was about. Communism was spreading across the world. Hundreds of millions of people were dying. And America decided to take a stand and stop this in its tracks before it spread across the world. And even though the Americans, you could say, lost the Vietnam War, they did stop the spread of communism. And, you could say that the Vietnam War was terrible, and if you look at young people dying, well, then that's obviously a terrible thing. And you could argue that there's nothing justifies that. But then, you can look at you can look at wherever communism lands, and you can see what an utter disaster it has been. You may have more of a positive view on it, but then, my evidence is North and South Korea and anywhere else that communism has touched. But that's yours. So that to me is the interesting backdrop to the Vietnam War, and it's usually the same for most political things. So, but you'll have your own take. I'm English. We kept out of that one. I think we weren't so sure of how the Americans were going to fight it, and maybe it was a political decision at the time. So if you're American, then you might have strong views, and if you're a Vietnam vet, then you definitely have your strong views that you're entitled to. You will get, I wouldn't say this keeps away from the politics of it. It's the daily experience, it is quite a gruesome read. So if you don't like that, then this book isn't for you. But if you want to have a view of the Vietnam War and you are, interested in what went on, or you just want some absolutely fabulous writing around that, then this book could be for you. So here's a little taster. It's the third short story. I won't. It's only a few pages long, but I won't even read all of it. It's on the section called Medics. So Zama, I think, is in Japan. At Zama, we read in the stateside papers that America was going to hell, that it was almost impossible to get an American teenager to act responsibly, listen to an adult, or for that matter, even to care. You'd think then that it would be impossible to get them to kill themselves for something as vague as duty, or run through claymores for anything as subtle as concern. But during the first 5 hours of Hamburger Hill, 15 medics were hit, 10 were killed. There was not one corpsman left standing. The 101st had to CA in medics from 2 other companies, and by 9 that night, every one of them too had been killed or wounded. Graham was 18 years old when a tracer round skidded off his flak vest and triggered a grenade in his webbing. He struggled for a moment to pull it off, and then, according to the other medic working with him, he jumped out of the aid station and kept running, with the grenade bouncing off his chest until it went off. Webb had been in Nam only 3 days when he got into his first firefight. The 3rd platoon working out ahead had killed 3 dinks near a bridge. A few 100 metres further, they found a small arms cache with 4 AK-50s, a couple of RPDs and a Smirnov attack rifle. They waited for the rest of the company, and then they all moved out through the waist-high grass. You could feel trouble coming. Up and down the line, the troopers switched their weapons to automatic and shifted their rucksacks so that they could drop them more easily. The machine gunners began carrying their weapons at port arms instead of across their shoulders. The grenadiers loaded their M79s with canister rounds. Up ahead, 50 metres away, was a thick tree line. The only sound was the company moving through the grass and an occasional tinkle of loose gear. Webb was walking with the sergeant. 30 metres, the sergeant said softly. We'll get hit inside of 30 metres. Sooner, a trooper offered dryly. 20 metres farther, the firing began. Even as he hit the ground, Webb saw 3 figures tumble over in front of him. Within seconds, the whole field was exploding. Automatic rifle fire cracked and snapped through the dry grass. An RPD, hidden off to the right, began firing and caught a squad trying to move off that way. 2 other machine guns opened up on the left. Seeing where they were falling, the Gooks began skipping rounds into them. Behind and overhead, Webb could hear the gunships thumping their way toward them. The VC stopped firing at the first loach, small and agile, swept in over their heads. A moment later, a Cobra swung in. Everybody was popping smoke grenades. Webb got to his knees and, seeing a trooper dragging a body toward a nearby rise, shook off his rucksack. Taking his helmet off and leaving it on the ground with his M16, he got to his feet and began running toward them with his aid kit. He made 10 metres before they got him. A clean straight round that caught him under his swinging left arm and came out the other side of his chest. In the Asho, an RPG landed next to the CP and buried itself in the ground before it exploded. Ignoring the explosion, the medic was reaching up over the trooper to open the albumen can he had just hung when the RPD swept the area. The first burst shredded through his flak vest, lifted him up and spinning him around before it dropped him back to earth 5 feet away. Watson had been a troublemaker since he was 6. He was a bitter, imaginative, hate-filled kid who had been drafted and somehow had survived basic training without ending up in prison. He was assigned to the medics at an evac hospital and then to the field. When he went online, the hospital personnel gave him a week to be busted and sent back to the States in irons. When I met him, he had been up front with his units for almost 5 months. He was soft-spoken, but marvellously animated and alert. The old abusiveness was gone. Even the adolescent arrogance I had been told had for so long been the central pillar of his personality had disappeared. He was perfectly at ease and open. Those who had known him before were pleasantly surprised, if still a bit leery. Watson didn't mind talking. "Why not go all out, man? They need me, and I know what I'm doing out there. Hundreds of cases. Fucking hundreds. The big shot dermatologists, they come down once a week. They look at all that rotting skin and shake their heads and leave. Know what we done? We got a mix master, threw in a couple of quarts of calamine lotion, a few kilograms of mycolgue for the fungus, and figured some tetracycline and penicillin couldn't hurt, just in case there was any bacteria around. Called it Jungle Mix and bottled it and handed it out. Fucking dermatologists couldn't believe it, wanted to know where we'd read about it, what medical journal. Sure, I take chances, that's my job, to save lives. The VC, well, I ain't got nothing against them. Guess they're doing their job too." On a routine sweep through Tam K, a squad of the American division was ambushed. Watson was hit twice, both rounds shattering his leg. He kept helping the wounded, dragging himself from soldier to soldier, until he was hit in the neck by a third round and paralysed. All the medics talk the same and they all act the same, whether they come from the ghetto or from the suburbs. No one planned it this way. It was the kids themselves, caught between their sceptical 17 or 18 years and the war, the politicians and the regular army officers. Growing up in a hypercritical adult world and placed in the middle of a war that even the dullest of them find difficult to believe in, much less die for. Very young and vulnerable, they are suddenly tapped not for their selfishness or greed, but for their grace and wisdom, not for their brutality, but for their love and concern. The army psychiatrists describe it as a matter of roles. The adolescent who becomes a medic begins, after a very short time, to think of himself as a doctor. Not any doctor in particular, but the generalised family doctor. The idealised physician he's always heard about. The excellent training the medics receive makes the whole thing possible, and the fact that the units return the corpsman's concern and competence with their own wholehearted respect and affection makes the whole thing happen. Medics in the 101st carried M&M candies in their medical kits long before the psychiatrists found it necessary to explain away their actions. They offered them as placebos for their wounded, who were too broken for morphine, slipping the sweets between their lips as they whispered to them over the noise of the fighting that it was for the pain. In a world of suffering and death, Vietnam is like a Walt Disney true life adventure, where the young are suddenly left alone to take care of the young. A tour of Nam is 12 months. It is like a law of nature. The medics, though, stay online only 7 months. It is not due to the goodwill of the army, but to their discovery that 7 months is about all these kids can take. After that, they start getting freaky, cutting down on their own water and food so they can carry more medical supplies, stealing plasma bottles and walking around on patrol with 5 or 6 pounds of glass in their rucksacks, writing parents and friends for medical catalogues so they can buy their own endotracheal tubes, or quite simply refusing to leave their units when their time in Nam is over. And so it goes, and the gooks know it. They will drop the point, trying not to kill him, but to wound him, to get him screaming so they can get the medic too. He'll come. They know he will. It's a very, very powerful book. Very, very powerful book. Small doses. Read it in small doses.